great day for work here at the Happy Healthy Workplace podcast. I'm Kimberly Ficklin, your host. And every week we talk to professionals just like you all around the world because we want to find out what they do to create a profitable business, the kind of business where people really want to work. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happy Healthy Workplace podcast. Today's guest is Shea Keats, and Shea is a business and leadership educator and strategic coach living in Portland, Oregon. Shea uses a unique combination of savvy business skills, narrative storytelling, and intuitive questioning to help her clients build comprehensive toolkits for life, business, and beyond. Shea holds a master's degree in business management and English literature from Case Western Reserve University and New York University, respectively. Before establishing her own practice, she worked as the director of brands and production at Kinder Modern in New York City. She's also an advisor with Breakaway Advising, an innovating bookkeeping firm serving small business. When she's not working, Shea can most likely be found hanging out with her best friend and a very good dog, Benson. Shea's also the founder and co-host of the podcast Camp Adulthood and the Resident Youth. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happy Healthy Workplace podcast. Today's guest is Shea Keats, and Shea is a business and leadership educator. Okay. Shea is also the founder and co-host of the podcast Camp Adulthood and the Resident Youth. Hello, Shea.
Hi, Kimberly. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah.
Shea and I met recently at a NOW event, which is National Association of Women Business Owners. Once we started chatting, I knew I wanted to interview her. And I know the listeners know that I've been wanting to talk about cross generations in the workplace. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And We're going to get a lot of really great information about how to bridge that gap between your older generation in the workplace and the younger generation that's coming in.
I was a little bit nervous because I was like, oh, if something happens, I'll give my whole generation a bad name. So I'm very excited that this worked out and we're going to really be able to dive into this topic, which I'm clearly very excited about and passionate about.
Yes, you are. And you're right. I have had 2 millennial coaches that didn't work out for interviews. So I've been really, really excited to find somebody. And honestly, I like it better anyway when you find somebody organically.
Yes.
The 2 coaches before had been sent by agencies. And so I didn't, I hadn't really worked with the agencies before. And so I love going into my local community and sitting with a bunch of women at a table and actually organically, being introduced to someone that is a great fit for the show. So
awesome.
I'm happy that you're here, Shea. And it worked out.
Me too. Good. Yeah.
Everything works out for a reason. I fully believe that. So that's
exactly.
And the listeners really, really, I know, want to understand how to bridge this gap. But first, let's start with the reason why you decided to become a millennial coach.
I call myself an entrepreneur, jack of all trades, because I do a little bit of everything. But part of my current business is I do career coaching for people at kind of that first transition in their career where they're moving from kind of that first job out of college, entry level, to really the second phase of their career. And I find this such an interesting part of our work life because that first job, it's a lot of I'm grateful for whatever I can get. And then the second job, it's about what do I want to do and what foundation do I have already that has set me up for success. So I do tend to work with a lot of particularly young women between the ages of 21 and 26 or 27. I just have always been really drawn to that age. And again, kind of those struggles at that first transition where it's no longer about I studied what I wanted to study in college because my parents wanted me to study at that. And really, what is it that I am good at and where can I be successful and build a life that is fulfilling to me both professionally and personally?
Well, that's a great reason. That's really a great reason. And, it's very needed, I think, because a lot of times, we hear it all the time of people come out of college and they often don't go into what they actually went to school for.
Yes.
And they also struggle to find work. And I do believe part of it is the transition between, being a child and being an adult. Technically, when you're in college, although you're an adult, you're still, in a lot of ways, most people are very tied to their parents still.
Yes. Yes.
financially. I mean, I know when my daughter went to school, my husband had to use his income for her FAFSA, even all the way up to
Hmm.
her like 25 or 26, 25. I think she was still in college, right?
Yeah.
She took a gap year.
Yep.
And it's really interesting, though, that I think that that's really the crux of it is how do I now be me without
Hmm.
this additional support? Does that make
Yep.
sense?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally. And it's a really interesting part of life. And I feel like kids don't get a lot of support. And partly it's because of all of these terrible stereotypes about millennials that, they're lazy and they're not engaged and they expect to be given a handout. And I think sometimes millennials can't even ask questions without being like, oh, well, you should just be happy with what you have. And they're like, I'm just asking a question. So again, it's really fun to be able to have that in-depth conversation with these young people.
That's interesting. It actually makes me think of, I think it happens to everyone. Now I'm kind of going back, in my 20s, it was
Hmm.
the same.
Yes.
Older people are like, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. You haven't lived
Yeah.
life to have these conversations. And when you said, just be quiet and go back, just be happy that you're here,
Yeah.
especially in the workplace. Oh, I can't even tell you how many times
Hmm.
I got told you're lucky to have a job, right? It's always
Yes.
like, what?
Yeah.
Really hard. I shouldn't be
Yeah.
lucky. Like I work hard to get here. Um,
Exactly.
even
Um,
as a young person.
hmm And I think what's so interesting, and you bring up such a good point, Kimberly, is that the millennial name or whatever, we get so caught up in a lot of these generational nomenclature that we forget that a lot of it doesn't have anything to do with whether you're Gen Z, Gen X, millennial, boomer. It's about being a young person. And when we forget this and we are throwing people into these buckets of, well, you're a Gen Z, so you're like this, you're a millennial, so you're like this, we actually miss out on these really incredible opportunities for mentorship. And I think that is what's really missing in kind of the modern workplace, because it's so much easier to just be like, I'm dismissing you because you fit this one criteria, as opposed to, okay, let me take the time to sit with you and figure out where the gaps are in your learning so we can fill those gaps and then retain you as an employee. Because millennials don't want to be job hopping, but they end up feeling like they have to because their basic workplace needs are not being met.
Right. And their basic workplace needs are very different than the boomers' workplace needs. And that's just because, I don't know, this is maybe a funny analogy, but I always go back to the rock and roll era. It was like, you kids and that rock and roll. And it's kind of like that just always, right? So it's like, it's the rage against maybe the unknown, I guess. Maybe it's that everybody becomes a little ignorant on both sides because they don't want to come together, right? So it's like, I don't want to learn what young people know
Yeah.
because they don't know what I know. And then young people are like, well, I don't want to learn what they know because they're old
Hmm.
and they don't know as much as I know. What's really interesting is, like you said, that dynamic. I think I shared with you when we were talking at this event that I had another millennial coach have a conversation with me. She brought up something very interesting that in her workplace, she had gotten a job and there was a lady there that was older and had been there for quite some time. Probably, I want to say like in a director position. And they weren't butting heads. They just were not getting along. They weren't collaborating and they didn't talk to each other. Two females in the room that were not collaborating with each other. And the millennial, funny enough, was the one who initiated a conversation by asking the other lady, let's go have a glass of wine after work. And they went and had a glass of wine. And basically, what happened was they became vulnerable with each other, which is what is key, really key here, too. And the older lady explained that she has spent a lot of time in the workplace with men
Hmm.
and always had
Yes.
to prove herself, right?
Uh-huh.
And so she has this defensive nature now at this point in
Hmm.
her life. And so she's not letting anybody in, especially not some 25-year-old, girl that
Yeah.
out of college. I'm not going to have you telling me what to do. I've been here a long
Yep.
time, right? So we have this, our egos get in the way, really is what that
Hmm.
is. And then in the same space, the younger lady was saying, well, you don't know everything. I know so much more technologically that I could show you. And, you're slow, like, move over, let me do it. And they
Yeah.
were frustrating each other in that way. But when
Uh-huh.
they actually sat down and had the conversation, they were able to be vulnerable, let each other know this is where our egos are getting in the way. And how can we help each other? And man, she said after that date, basically, is
Hmm.
what they
Yeah.
had. that they loved each other and they helped each other out in the workplace a lot. And I love that story because
Hmm.
really it's a conversation that has to be had first. Would you
Yes.
agree with that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it brings up a thing that comes up a lot in my coaching and my workshop about managing millennials is that millennials have a very different communication style, and communication is the most important thing to them. They want things to not only be clear, but they want things to be transparent. So oftentimes, just like as your story demonstrated, when you feel like you're butting heads with somebody who is maybe from that younger generation, it's a great time for someone to take the lead, again, step into that mentorship role and say, okay, let's sit down and have a coffee or for lunch or a glass of wine and get to the bottom of this. And millennials so appreciate that. And often it's really not that much time out of the executive's day to be like, okay, I'm going to go get lunch anyway. I might as well take whomever with me and have a chat and get to that vulnerability. And then, of course, the next layer on that is millennials are really not attracted. And this is also very, very true for Gen Z, who are just now hitting the workplace. So we're going to be seeing more and more of them coming up, but they want you to be transparent with them. And I'm sure for that gal, it meant so much to her when the older woman was able to say, like, hey, this was really tough for me as a woman, and this is why I struggle with this with you. I think, again, an easy story for that woman to share, but totally shifted the dynamics of that relationship. So that type of transparency. And then it goes into this bigger picture where millennials don't want to do things if they don't know why they're doing it. So they don't mind if the task is mundane, but if they feel like they're doing a mundane task just because this is the way it's always been done, or without knowing kind of what the bigger picture is, what is this playing into? How is this helping the company? That's when they're really going to push back in terms of tasks. So again, being able to communicate like, this is why we're doing this, particularly from, again, the C-suite down, that can be so, so helpful.
Oh, I completely agree. So now you're
Yeah.
talking my language. Employee engagement. That's what it is in a nutshell. It's when the employee understands what the impact of their job has on the company.
Hmm.
And they have to know that the only way they can know is if you tell them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because just giving them a job description and having them go out and even like giving a raise at the end of the year, which is great, give raises. But most often the feedback is really what they need. They need to
Hmm.
know, when I do this, what does that mean in the bigger scheme of things, right? And I
Yeah.
think all employees need that, number one. But like you mentioned, our younger workforce is coming up and thinking
Hmm.
about things in a different way. So we need to start
Exactly.
thinking about, what does engagement actually mean? And that's really, in a nutshell, what you just mentioned is really what engagement is. It's
Yeah.
transparency, autonomy, authenticity, and understanding what their impact in the workplace is.
And I think another thing that somewhat tangentially, but I think is important to mention at this juncture is that the oldest millennials are now nearing 40. So you have millennials starting to enter. I mean, at some companies, particularly startups, they may be in that C-suite leadership position. There's this really interesting transition happening as, again, millennials start to come into leadership or really firmly in that mid-level management position. And they now have this choice. Okay, where do my values lie? Am I going to just repeat what my leaders did because I think that's the right way to do it, even though I don't like it? Or am I going to connect to these really exciting forms of communication and engagement that I've always wanted and translate that to the people coming up behind me? I've seen it really go both ways, and I find that so interesting. Again, I think it's important to not just communicate with our brand new, fresh eyed, out of college first few years, but also say, okay, how can we empower those mid level leaders to be allowed to use this communication that we know is effective, particularly with our new employees and our younger workforce?
Oh, absolutely. Creating the space for it. We talk about
Hmm.
that a lot here on the podcast. Is
Awesome.
really the number one thing is creating space,
Yeah.
because nothing can happen until there is that space for it. So
Yes.
pretty much every episode of this podcast
Well, here we go.
really boils down to creating space. And here we are again. The one thing that I think you just brought up that was very interesting to me was that we're here speaking to C-suite, V-suite exec leaders.
Hmm.
some of those people are millennials.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter works for a company here in Portland that is, its owner is under 30. It's a very, very big company that has
Yeah.
done very well in a very short period of time,
Yeah.
manufacturing. And you've got to remember that this is who I'm talking to right now,
Yeah.
right? And I admittedly, I do it myself because I am older. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
over 50. So I'm expecting everybody that I'm speaking to, as far as CEOs, B-suite, and the people that I'm interviewing, mostly
Mm-hmm.
are my age, right? They're 45
Yes.
or over. It's really not true. So that was a great point for you to bring up because I myself forget it.
And it's really interesting because I think it's so easy to almost infantilize a colleague of mine, and maybe I shouldn't say this in case he listens to this podcast, but he was recently giving me a compliment, which I so appreciated. But he was like, "You're at the beginning of your career." And I was like, wait, just because I'm a millennial doesn't mean I'm at the beginning of my career. I'm 13, 14 years into my career. I'm 35. So I'm not in the same boat as someone who is 10 years younger than me, but who is technically also a millennial. And this is something that we talk about so much on my podcast, Camp Adulthood, which is that millennials are really two different generations. And we have our pre recession and our post recession millennials, and they experience the world very differently. So for me, I'm like, man, I worked really hard to get here and to be where I am, where a younger millennial, and again, I don't call it entitlement. I think that's a dirty word, but they're coming into their work with, they have a few more expectations for how things may be. And I feel like I'm getting a little circular here, but they're very excited. I'm excited to be playing, and I still feel like I get a little resentful if people are like, "Oh, you're still so young." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I worked really hard." But then
Mhm.
you have these younger millennials hitting the workforce who are basically saying like, "Yeah, I'm here. I went to college. Like, I know all the things." So again,
As we
it's
all did in our
finding, as
20s.
we all did in our 20s. And then again, it's that youth versus generation. So again, I get so excited about this. I try and hit all the topics at once,
No,
which
it's great. I'm
is
glad you actually
maybe
brought that
not
up
the best,
because
but yeah.
yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, Shay, because there are stages, right? So I was doing
Mhm.
some research after we chatted. And I mean, in the millennial space alone, there's I want to say four different buckets, elder millennials. And then there was a one and a two or a
Uh-huh.
something. I don't know. So talk a little bit about, can you clear up all of that for us, Shay?
Yes.
Thank you. That would be
Yeah.
wonderful because I'm sure everybody's confused if they did one Google search. You're
Yes.
off your rocker trying to figure out millennials. So,
So I love this question because I think there's a lot of people who have defined it in many different ways. I tend to go with a slightly wider range that follows a little more closely what the Pew poll said. So we're looking at basically 1980, people born between 1980 and 1998. So if you fit in that range, you are a millennial. Now, again, when you Google it, some people are going to say it's 1984 to 2000. Some polls say it's 1977 through 1994. But really, kind of the standard is that 1980 through 1998. So again, our oldest millennials are turning 40 this year. Our youngest are just finishing college, I guess. I don't know if my math is right. So that's a really, really wide range. Now, as we all know, and I won't get into politics, but our country has undergone huge changes, big things have happened over the span of that 20 years. And for millennials, again, for my purposes of my work, I split them into two categories. And the one I heard this and I loved it, ancient millennials. So you're looking at people who entered the workforce before 2008. And then millennials, I call regular millennials or just millennials, those who entered the workforce after 2008. And of course, 2008 was the recession. So that's really the one big differentiator, because those who entered clearly the workforce before the recession kind of got to take advantage of some of that economic prosperity. And you have people like me who entered the workforce in 2008. So I graduated from college in 2006, but I was like, oh, economy's great. I'll take a year abroad and I'll go back to grad school. And then I was like, oh, worst choice ever in terms of my work. And for those millennials who entered the workforce at that time, they really have a unique experience. And they have to work a lot harder to earn the same at the same points in their career as Gen X and boomers. So they're always playing catch up. And then you have the younger millennials who entered the workforce, let's say after the recession. So after 2000, I don't know exactly, 10 or so. And, they had a kind of in a similar experience. The economy was okay. They were able to find jobs, but there was still a lot of, I think, repercussions from the recession. So that's kind of the first historical event that really affected our generation and divided it. And then the second is clearly 9/11. And if you experience 9/11 as, a high schooler versus a second grader, your experiences of the world are totally, totally different before and after that event. And that event also kind of coincides with when the internet became way more prevalent in homes. So again, kind of about that 2000 to 2002, our world changed so incredibly. So for me, I didn't really have the internet in my house growing up, but my co-host on my podcast, Maddie, who is 10 years younger than me, also a millennial, she grew up, she's really truly more of a digital native, where I can remember a time before the internet. So I said there were only two kind of cleaving moments between millennials, but there are actually three. And I would say the recession, 9/11, and the prevalence of the internet in the home.
Well, that's all so I've never heard it broken down like that, nor have I ever even begun to think about how those very big events
Mm-hmm.
change people's viewpoints. I mean, I know how it does adults because we talk about it all the time, but I didn't
Yeah.
think about a teenager or, wow, that's also interesting to me. I
Yeah.
can't even begin to tell you. My kids are all millennials, 1985, 88, and 90. So I have a ancient, is that what you said?
Yes, ancient millennial.
An
But
ancient millennial. And then
yeah.
my youngest is 5 years younger than her. So I have,
Yes.
a millennial. Yeah, it's very interesting, the difference between them. They're all very different, even though they're not too far apart. The other thing that was interesting is you said, I didn't have the internet in my house growing up. My daughter was 16 when we
Yeah.
got a gateway computer with
Yeah.
AOL dial up.
Yeah.
So yes, needless to say, my oldest did not really, she's about your age, just a little bit younger,
Mm-hmm.
not really had internet in her house. So
Yeah.
the other two though did, right?
Uh-huh.
And cell phones, because my oldest daughter was one of the quickest texters in the world. Now everybody texts as quick as her. And she had
Yeah.
an old, like Cricket prepaid phone,
Oh, with the
something way back,
T5 or whatever that's called.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But those things, even just the phone, all the technology that has taken
Yeah.
place during this time frame of millennials is a
Mm-hmm.
very interesting change in
Yeah.
dynamics in our world.
Yeah. Well, again, I think the phone is such a great example. When I was in college, I remember my first year, this, kind of iconic thing of I'd like pull the wall phone out into the hallway and like, call my grandma. And then again, Maddie, my co-host, when I met her, she was a freshman in college. She's had an iPhone since she was in middle school, and it's not that she comes from some, fabulously wealthy family or anything. It was just ubiquitous by the time she hit that
Mhm.
age. And it's just fascinating. And I think, again, bringing it back to the workplace, that digital native divide is really interesting as well. Because, for example, again, myself at 35, I'm truly not a digital native. And something I talk about in my workshop, because it can be really frustrating for these kind of ancient or older millennials when they're like, can you just show me how the Slack works? And I'm sitting here like, I'm knee deep to my eyeballs in actual client work. No, I cannot come and troubleshoot your Slack or your printer or whatever for you, boomer. But, and partly that's because I don't know how to do it. I'm not a digital native. Like, I have a little more facility with these programs and I pick them up more quickly, but I am not like these Gen Z kids who are entering the workforce right now. I can have, an assistant or an intern and they're up to speed within 3 minutes, where I'm like, okay, that took me 3 weeks to feel up to speed on that platform. So I think that's another really interesting thing. But yeah, I will get actual rage if someone asks me to like fix their Google. I can't do it.
You're like, I do not know. Okay,
I don't know.
Yeah, do not ask me. I love that point because I'm going to bring that right back to how in the bleep bleep world do we have a workplace where we
Yeah.
have people who are so incredibly differing, not only just generationally, but intergenerationally? How does an employer make everybody happy, Shay?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that it comes back to, again, that question of communication. And as long as companies can be as transparent and as vocal as possible about what's happening, I think that makes things a lot better. I think we need to embrace mentorship. I use this word a lot. It's a word I think that is overused now, but it's one that I don't take lightly. As long as, if you want to be a leader, I think you have to be a mentor. And it's more about lifting each other up than having a competitive workspace, which I think this is something which we could have a whole nother podcast on, that I think about a lot in relation to women in the workplace, because it amazes me how many women still have that attitude of, oh gosh, I'm the only one. There can only be one, whatever.
Mhm.
Honestly, I think most companies, if they spend the time, and not to get too woo woo, but to identify core values and think about those on a corporate level, and have these questions and these terms and these words that you can come back to. Again, if you're a C-suite executive and one of your company's core values is transparency, let's say, for example, because I'm working with a company right now and that is one of their, I had to switch it. It was brutal honesty. And I was like, guys, we can't have brutal honesty. We can have radical transparency, but we cannot have brutal
Yeah,
honesty.
that just
Um,
hurts feelings.
yeah, I was like, that makes me, if you guys talk about the Enneagram on here, I'm an Enneagram 9. And I was like, no, that seems too conflict oriented for me. But yeah, so it's a question where, okay, how can then that apply across the workforce? And when your, let's say, junior person comes up to you and has a question and you're like, I'm really busy, I can't answer them, you can go back and use that touch point and you can say, well, you know what? We value kindness and transparency. So I am going to take these 5 minutes and make them walk with me down to the lobby to grab a coffee. And I'm going to fill them in on this, even though it means I'm going to have to stay 5 minutes later tonight. So it's, again, having those core values that will then influence the relationships and the communication.
Yeah, I love that. Again, it's just creating a space.
Yeah.
You've just asked a
Yeah.
leader to create a 5-minute space.
Yeah.
And here's a tip. If the listeners haven't picked up on this yet, here's what I'm thinking, that one of the tips, because obviously Shay's sharing with us a lot of great stuff here today, but I love the lunch with the CEO. So
Mm-hmm.
the last podcast, I did a solo podcast and I talked about my ebook that is the 25 icebreakers. And it's a
Love
coffee
that.
chat, and it's just creating a 15-minute space every morning on asking some non-triggering, just questions that people don't feel uncomfortable asking, and doing
Mm-hmm.
that all the time. Well, I love the lunch with the CEO idea. You just said, well, why don't you just take them to lunch too? You
Yeah.
said coffee, but I like that idea too, because any space that you create is a great space. But
Yeah.
in my mind, I'm going back to that when you said, take them to lunch and sit down and have a
Mm-hmm.
question. Wouldn't it be great? And I know you have a lot of stuff to do, but
Yeah.
like you said, in the
Yeah.
effort of going back to your values and your mission and saying, this
Yeah.
is what I do, maybe it's once a month you have an
Mm-hmm.
employee go to lunch with you and you make it all about that employee. And I don't mean like showering them with gifts, but I mean just
Yeah.
asking them everything about themselves, learning a little bit more about them. And here's the other thing, is maybe working with somebody that can help you with questions that would be
Mm-hmm.
appropriate to ask and get you the answers that you want without making anybody feel uncomfortable, or
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm at lunch with the CEO and
Yeah.
they are just trying to get information from me. It's kind of like surveys, right? Like, I can't
Mm-hmm.
really tell the truth because,
Mm-hmm.
but when you start to implement something like this, just like we've talked about a million times on the podcast, then people see it. Every month you start doing it, every month it
Yeah.
works out fine. Maybe at first everybody's a little bit like, I don't know if I can really
Yeah.
trust this guy, girl, he, she, they. But after a while, they will. When it becomes a commitment, people think you really care. You're committed to it, they're committed to it. So anyway, I just wanted to
Exactly.
bring that up because I think that's a really great idea.
Yeah. Thank you. And I love too, I mean, again, as you keep mentioning, the whole idea of making space is so wonderful. And one thing that's wonderful about millennials and these younger generations is the lines between the personal and professional life are a little more blurred. And I think this does get into some gray areas that, again, could be the subject of another podcast. But that being said, it allows so many more opportunities for you to make space and to be a mentor. For example, like you said, lunch is amazing, coffee, but you could also say, if you notice that there's a gal who like trots in with her yoga mat every day and you also do yoga, strike up a conversation with her about yoga and be like, oh, would you mind if I joined you at a class? Or, if you notice somebody is getting ready to, I don't know, like they have a sticker on their water bottle from a bar that you used to go to, say, oh, do you go to that bar? I used to love that place. Make sure to try the whatever cocktail. I don't know my cocktail names, but so there's just all of these ways that by being observant, you can, again, create that space to connect and to be a mentor. And because we're not quite so rigid with that separation between the personal and professional, you can ask, clearly there are always the questions that are off the table, but you can ask like, oh, I see you have a yoga mat. Do you like yoga? You can ask those questions and those don't seem invasive or inappropriate to a millennial. They feel like, oh my gosh, someone's connecting with me and this is amazing. And then being able to find those topics that are maybe outside of the workplace can really foster some amazing dialogue.
Yes, I completely agree with that. But here's the thing too, is there's always been a separation and it's been really important in business for that to be separated. And, like when you're a peer and you get a promotion and now you're the supervisor, now all of a sudden you have this problem that you've got to be like, I can't be friends with my friends anymore. I got to be their boss. Yeah. This has been the stupidest thing we've ever done in business. And I've said it time and time again, because we absolutely 100% relate what we do in our businesses, what we do for a living, to who we are. We've never, ever left things at the office and come home and had it been, or left things at home. Never, never. People always have everything follow them. Mental illness, depression, problems at home, finances, all of that goes hand in hand. And anytime you ask somebody, you meet somebody, you're like, oh, okay, so Shea, what do you do? Yeah. It's the first thing. And then Shea has an answer because we relate to that. So beginning to say in any way, shape, or form that going into work every day and putting up this cardboard box around our personal life has ever worked.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And, again, millennials, once again, are drawn to come. You want to retain millennials. This is how you do it, by connecting to them with them, quote unquote, outside of the workplace. Because a millennial wants to be able to come to you and be able to say, hey, I have got this challenge that's not necessarily work related, but it affects my work. How can I still be the best employee I can be, even if I have to leave early on Thursdays because I'm going to therapy or whatever? And, it's amazed me how reticent companies have been to allow this kind of open dialogue. And it's funny because I've had jobs where I haven't been allowed to go to therapy, or I haven't been allowed to do a volunteer job that I'd been doing for 10 years because, oh no, you can't take an hour off of work. And surprise, surprise, I'm not working at any of those companies anymore, because they weren't able to retain me. But also, acknowledging, and I think this brings up something that's interesting for millennials and Gen Z, and Gen X is also facing some of these challenges. It has to do a lot with the way our workplace is currently constructed to serve someone who is in a traditional nuclear family. But millennials have a non-traditional families, and B, because boomers are aging and now getting sick and need a lot more care, guess who millennials' parents are? They're boomers. So we have to be open about the fact that millennials will have to leave work early to care for a sick parent, and they may also have a sick baby. This is a whole new thing, I think, in the workplace that we're pretending isn't happening, but is happening. And we have now our mid-level leaders, those who are looking to get into that C-suite in the next few years. They've got a parent in assisted living and a kid in preschool. Like, how do you deal with that? And if we can't talk about our personal lives, if I can't go to my boss and say, like, I'm really struggling because my mom is sick and my kid is in competitive soccer and it's taking up all of my freaking time. If we can't be open about that, we can't advance,
Well, we have a lot more in common in that respect than people would think then, because I
Yeah.
just read something recently about boomers, and boomers are in the same situation with taking care of their elderly parents and their college age children
Yeah.
financially.
Yes,
Right? So
financially.
it's so
Yep.
different. It just goes back to what we said in the beginning. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what label we put on the generation. We've all gone through the same things. Now,
Yes.
it's a little bit different in that technology has changed a lot. So
Hmm.
things that my parents, me, it's a lot different that way. But really, I mean, to come together with it all, it's not that
Yeah.
different. It's not
Yeah.
that different. It's just a different generation, and we're going through the same things we've always gone through. And it's always
Hmm.
growing pains, and it's always nobody being able to have respect for either your elder or the person younger. We all bring so much to the table.
Yeah.
Like you said, that, yeah, gee, if I sat with a millennial who was going through the same things you just spoke of, their
Hmm.
aging parents and their soccer playing child.
Yeah.
And then that millennial realized that I'm like, wow, yeah, I have parents in assisted living and trying to put my kids through college. And I
Yeah.
have to work right now until I'm 65 because
Hmm.
I couldn't financially afford to retire. And wouldn't
Yeah.
we both look at each other like, wow,
Hmm.
wow, I didn't really realize we have these
Yeah.
struggles that are so close to each other.
And then you become an ally. And again, I feel like empowering our executives and our leaders to say, like, to not make us adhere to that 9 to 5. Like, you need to leave at 3. No big deal, because I know that you do awesome work and I don't need you to just be a button in the chair at this office
Mhm.
anymore. You can
Mhm.
get your work done by 3, and you need to, like, again, go get your mom's prescription, or heck, if you just want to go to yoga by yourself for 5 minutes, do it. Because
Mhm.
again, as like you said, or the name of your podcast, the happy, healthy workplace, that's how you create that. It's not about punching the clock and sitting there. It's about becoming allies with our coworkers and figuring out how we can truly support each other.
That is a very, very old school mentality that I think
Yeah.
within the next decade is going to be almost completely obliterated,
Yeah.
which is
I hope.
butts in seats from nine
Yeah.
to five. It's just going to not be that way. It
Yeah.
can't be that way. We can't sustain it. I
Yeah.
have chronic illness from
Hmm.
the stress of my workplace. People have mental illness from the stress of their workplace. We can't
Hmm.
continue to do things the way that we've done them with so
Yeah.
much pressure on people and expect any good performance or profitability in your workplace. It's
Hmm.
just not going to happen. You're going to have absenteeism all over the place. You're going to have
Hmm.
presenteeism. People are going
Yeah.
to come to work, they're half there because they've got their mind on mom and getting all of it. There's not enough time in the day for us to get it all done. And that's why we're
Uh-huh.
all stressed with chronic illness and, all that goes on. So the workplace has to change. And I fully believe in the next decade, we're just podcasts like this, conversations
Yeah.
like you and I are having, Shay, is busting down the old model. I'm not a boomer. I'm not a boomer, but I came from a model of workplace where you're lucky to have a job and
Hmm.
they work you hard and you get no appreciation for it whatsoever. You're just
Hmm.
lucky to have a job. And that was the mentality when I was working, and the reason why I don't work in workplace,
Yes.
but the reason why they didn't retain me, right,
Yeah.
was the same reason. And it's just got to change. It really has to change because we can't have people like myself, my age group, going into the elderly age group
Hmm.
sick, super
Yeah.
stressed out with more illnesses than any other generation before us
Yeah.
because we have not understood this correlation between personal and business and being able to get our needs met or
Hmm.
having transparent conversations or having autonomy in our jobs, because those are
Hmm.
the things that are really going to turn this all around. I love this conversation that we're having. We're
Yeah.
getting close to closing here, Shay.
Okay.
And
Awesome.
it's so great. I mean, so often I say to my guests, we could talk about this forever. And like you said, we could
Yes.
have 10 sidebar conversations about it. I
Yep.
do have recurring guests, Shay, so you're welcome to come back
Oh, I
anytime.
would love to.
Yeah, I do. Karen Rayburn is one of ours. Actually, she was supposed to interview next week, but she had to push it out till March. She shared her 4 company pillars with us, 3 so far.
Oh, cool.
And in March, we'll be hearing the 4th. So I love to have recurring guests. You did bring up
Yes.
something that interested me that I think
Uh-huh.
we haven't talked about yet, which is women in the workplace.
Hmm.
And I think both you and I would have a great perspective because I am a 52-year-old woman,
Yes.
been in the workplace forever. You're a 30-something-year-old woman. We have different perspectives and yet probably very close to the same. I think that would be a great topic for you to come back and talk to us about.
Yes, I would love that. So anytime, you let me know.
Wonderful. Great. Okay. So Shea,
Yes.
usual, this was a wonderful, this was a really good conversation for me. I love
Oh, thank you.
that, but this is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, as you
hmm
know. So I'm really excited that we got it done. But in closing, Shea, is there anything you think that needed to be said that we did not say?
Gosh, I feel like we really covered a lot. I think I would just make two recommendations for my two favorite books about kind of managing millennials and how to really, again, create that happy, healthy workplace that you're shooting for. And the first is a book called Millennials Taking the Lead. It's by Carolyn White Four, PhD. And we actually had her on our podcast, and she is amazing. She's actually a boomer herself and went back for her PhD later in life and was just so impressed by her own children. I love her story. And she was like, I want to do my dissertation on millennial leadership. And it's a really wonderful book. It's an ebook you can get on Amazon. And my other favorite book about kind of what I consider to be the new millennial workplace is called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. Highly, highly recommend. It's by the gentleman who started the company Basecamp, which is a project management software. And they have, it's an amazing book. Those would be my two recommendations. And then I'm sure you say all of this in the intro, but feel free to come over and visit me and my co-host Maddie at Camp Adulthood. And I'll be opening up my coaching calendar for Q2 here, I think next week. So if that's something that interests you, listeners, feel free to shoot me an email. And I also have a workshop called Managing Millennials that I would love to get in front of more people.
Wonderful. Thanks for all that information, Shea.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for being a guest.
Yay.
We really appreciate this information. I know that I get asked a lot, so it's really good stuff. And this was a great conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Don't forget to head on over to Camp Adulthood and the Resident Youth. You can find it on any of your favorite podcast players, as well as the happyhealthyworkplace.com on any of your podcast players. Also, don't forget to check the website for show notes and links to all of Shea's goodness. And again, this is the close of the Happy Healthy Workplace podcast. Have a happy, healthy day. That's a wrap for today. The Happy Healthy Workplace podcast is now complete. Be sure to subscribe and join us weekly for secrets, solutions, or strategies that help you create a profitable business where people really want to work. This is Kimberly Ficklin, wishing you a happy, healthy day.